Hey, everybody, welcome back to another edition of Big Guy Fantasy Sports Fantasy Football Consistency Show. And of course, I'm Bob Long here from Big Guy Fantasy Sports. And sitting right beside me there is not Ron Rigney. Ron had to go to his son's football game, so it's good. But guess what? I brought in the man, the legend from SiriusXM and Fantasy Sports, Fantasy Points. On every Tuesday and Thursday morning on SiriusXM, I listen to him as I'm driving to work. I love hearing his voice. It is one, the only, Mr. Brian Drake. How you doing, brother?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited to be on. I've been a longtime purchaser of the consistency guide, so now to actually get to sit here and talk to you about it is exciting. It's actually sitting right next to me on my coffee table.
I love it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate all your support. And yeah, I mean, I said it's just great listening to you every morning. You bring such a fresh, it's just fresh. I just love listening to you. You put a lot of humor into it, and but also a lot of great knowledge. And with Brawley or whoever's on with you, Joe Dolan, Paul Kelly, all the guys, they're all so smart, so good, and love listening to you guys every morning. So let's talk about the world of fantasy football. I've heard you talk. I've heard you. I can hear it in your voice, like you'll hear it in my voice. Like, what is going on? We are through a month, week 4. So 4 games. Now we're starting to see some consistency after weeks 1 and 2, and even 3. It's kind of like, all right, let's see what's going on. Week 4. Now we're a month in. So now we've got some numbers, we've got some data, and it's ugly. It is so ugly, folks. But that's what we're here for. That's what Brian's here for. I want to present the numbers, talk about where things are at. And is the light at the end of the tunnel a train, or is it some hope that some consistency models are going to start kicking in? Some of these players are going to start getting in their flow. We're going to start at the quarterback position, Brian, and we only have one quarterback who's a perfect 4 for 4 clutch games, and clutch factor right now is still a low 18.2. That's still the lowest in as far as I know, and I've been doing this for 20 years. A couple of weeks ago, it was actually 17.2. So we actually bounced up a whole point. But yet we still only have one perfect quarterback that's 4 for 4. That is one Lamar Jackson. He's first in total points. Jordan Love is 2 for 2 in the games he's played, so he's perfect, but hasn't played for a couple weeks too. At 75%, Jaden Daniels, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith. I don't think anybody was planning on any of those guys being this high, but they are. And they're second, third, fourth in total points. So it's not like they're just squeaking by at above 18.2 fantasy points, but there they are. We'll come back to that in a second. But the rest of the 75 percenters, Jalen Hurts, Brock Purdy, and Joe Burrow. Brian, wow. I know JJ Zachariason probably sleeps like a baby every night because he tells you late round quarterbacks. Don't go early. Don't jump for them. If you did, we'll get to that lower list in a second. But what is happening? What are you hearing, seeing? What are the fantasy points data showing? What is going on with this quarterback world? Why is there no consistency, at least in the first month, of the top players? Why are some of these not lesser? No, we all know who these guys are, but just not the fantasy top guys. We don't expect to see a rookie, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and Geno Smith in the top 6 in total points, and right there at 75% consistent, basically tied for second in consistency at this point. What is happening? What are you hearing and seeing from your perspective?
I think there's a lot of factors with the quarterbacks, and everyone has talked about how scoring's down and teams are running the ball more, and it looks more like a late 80s NFL than a 2024 version. And there might be a few factors for that. And I think number one is these guys are still in the preseason. They don't play anything in training camp. There's no real games for them. This is their preseason. I think now we've got 4 games in. We're going to start to see things evolve. We got things on tape. We know kind of what works, what doesn't. People are getting in shape. They're rounding into form with coordinators and whatnot. It's a joke, this NFL preseason, Bob, that all these guys, they just practice, and then they never play in the preseason games, and then they're expected to go out here and compete at a high level. The defenses are so much more ahead of the offenses, but by the end of the year, it'll come around. We'll be seeing all these teams putting up all sorts of points. The other thing is, number one, with the preseason not being there. Number two, teams are playing a lot of too high safety, and that's something you guys might have heard out there in the Twitter spheres. Oh, they're playing so too high safety. You can't get over the top on these guys. And that is true, that you're seeing defenses at a higher rate than ever play too high safety. So who is really coming through for fantasy right now? We're looking at Lamar Jackson. Per fantasy points data of qualifying quarterbacks, he leads all quarterbacks at 0.74 fantasy points per dropback. That means every time Lamar drops back, he's averaging 0.74 fantasy points, followed by Jaden Daniels, then Josh Allen, and after you got Sammy Darnold mixed in there, which is amazing, and then Anthony Richardson. What's that show you? It's guys who can run, first of all. That's why it's so much higher, and that's why in fantasy you always want to have that quarterback that's got that dual threat capability. But also, these are guys they're not throwing the ball that far down the field. Lamar is kind of dink and dunk, and that offense now is predicated on Derrick Henry in the run. Jaden Daniels, hell, they call it the horizontal raid. They're not throwing the ball all down the field. They're starting to a little bit in week 4. Even Josh Allen. People thought, oh, Josh Allen is this big gunslinger. Who's he throwing the ball to? Khalil Shakir in the slot. He's got Dalton Kincaid, who's his tight end. He's not throwing the ball 50 yards down the field anymore to Gabe Davis. That doesn't exist because the defense is taking it away. And that's why you see Mahomes is having such struggles. Bob, can you imagine people are out there talking about how Mahomes is a game manager and they want to drop him in fantasy league? And it's crazy what's going on out here.
Yeah. But the points, the data is showing. I mean, Kyler Murray, 13th in total points, 25% consistent. Patrick Mahomes, 15th in total points, 50% consistent. Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, 5th and 9th. Allen's 5th, Dak is 9th. But all of them, 50% or less consistency. Like you said, the legs are doing something, obviously, to get points that high, but they're doing it in peaks and valleys, which is really hurting players right now, hurting fantasy owners right now with that lack of consistency. And as you said, Brian, it's going to come back. Certainly don't go out there and start trading off Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen for Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. You're going to kick yourself at the end of the season, guaranteed. If you are, trade them to us. We'll take them off your hands if they're really burdening you. But you're right. And we're going to move into the running back position, and I'm going to share some data, consistency data, which is amazing because we haven't seen this in so long. So we talked about there's, the lack of perfection in quarterbacks. Let's talk about the excess of perfection in the running back position. Now, right now, there are 12, count them, 12 running backs who are a perfect 4 for 4 in consistency after the first 4 weeks. There are only 4 wide receivers that are perfect. That's never been that way at any point in any season after 4 weeks or more in my consistency model for the 20 years I've been doing this. It's always been the flip of that. It's always the receivers have all of the consistency and the perfect, we could get into week 8 or 10. We'd still have 5 or 6 perfect wide receivers. We're down to 4 already. But we'll get to them in a minute. But we have 12 perfect running backs. A lot of good ones. A lot of ones you expect to see. Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson. Yep, they were drafted to be our studs, to be our bell cows. They're performing well. But there's some others. Come on, Kyron Williams we even put into that list because he was certainly drafted in the first 2 to 3 rounds to be that. Now we've got Jordan Mason in there. We all know that's basically a byproduct of McCaffrey not being around, but some surprises. Aaron Jones, 6th in total points, perfectly consistent. David Montgomery, which I may have mentioned, but he's always been consistent. Got him in a lot of leagues. Zach Charbonnet, perfectly consistent. Interestingly enough, Kenneth Walker is also 2 for 2 in the games he's played. So those 2 running backs are a perfect 6 for 6 in only 4 games in consistency. That Seattle backfield is really cranking. And then Brian Robinson is one that I really loved going into the season. Got his running back 3, at worst 2, but a lot of 3 RB3 spots. Got him in both Kings Classic divisions late. Didn't have to pay a lot in the auction. So he's been coming through for me. Now he's got a little bit of a tweak. We hope there's nothing there, but there's your 100%. We also had, of course, like I said, Kenneth Walker, Pacheco's 2 for 2, and now Kareem Hunt 1 for 1. So the lesser, but still perfect in a sense. Just like you said, Brian, we're running the ball more. We're focusing on controlling it, keeping it, they're trying to keep it all honed in, not letting the teams go deep. Right there, the proof is in the pudding from a consistency standpoint, a point standpoint, as what you said, which is they're running the ball more. They're keeping things, if they are passing it, they're a lot of check downs. So the running backs, so that's where Kamara and some of these guys come into play. Your thoughts on that top group of running backs there? Which of them maybe are surprising you from their start to the season? And do you expect that to continue, or do you think they might fall off?
I'm really impressed with what Alvin Kamara is doing in New Orleans, especially the first few weeks. It's a great scheme they have going on down there with Clint Kubiak. And here's the secret sauce of all these running backs. Save, maybe Brian Robinson a little bit and the Detroit guys. These are all guys who aren't sharing the football, right? Kamara, Barkley, Henry, Kyron, Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones. None of these guys are sharing the football. Right. So that's what we want. We want that bell cow in fantasy football. And you try to stay away from some of these shared backfields. Cincinnati's got a little bit of an issue with that right there. The Raiders, the Tennessee, but also, you want the most simplistic answer of all time. I got a website full of all the craziest stats you can ever think of. Fantasy football going back to who scores touchdowns.
Yep.
Let's look at the running back position. Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Kyron Williams lead the NFL with 5 rushing touchdowns. Oh, what do you know? They're in the top 5 in consistency ratings. And it's all the same guys. Barkley, right. Ken Walker in a few games. So it almost goes back to this non-PPR world. Remember, we used to live in that where it's like, we just need guys who score touchdowns. And there's these old dinosaurs that would play in touchdown-only leagues. But that's really what's going on. Go down the board and say, wow, who are some of these guys who are really struggling right now? And at running back, and they're the guys that aren't scoring any touchdowns.
Right.
Joe Mixon can't get on the field.
Stevenson
can't score any touchdowns.
Najee Harris, Rashad White
got 1 touchdown.
Joe Mixon, Chase Brown.
Yeah, it's really that simple. Why are these guys struggling? Because they're not getting in the box. They're getting some work for sure. You look at Tony Pollard. I like Tony Pollard a lot, and he's got 61 carries on the season. Got 16 targets, but he only has 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Alvin Kamara, like you said, 5 touchdowns. Well, it's an easy game if you pick the guys that get in the end zone.
Right. Well, and so going back to, as you mentioned, the Lions backs. Last game where they have 3 between them. Zach Moss and Chase Brown had 3 between them in their game. Yeah, like you said, if you get those guys, everything's all great, right? And we just hope they
play at a good pace with good offensive lines too. That helps. Yeah. The Lions play at a good pace, and they've got the best offensive line in the league. So, they're constantly in the red zone and putting up some points. But on the other side, I bet somebody will talk about in a little bit, who's it hurting? Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. They're not doing anything for fantasy right now.
Right. Yeah, we'll definitely get to that.
The only way they're scoring points is by running the football.
Right. And, just to kind of go down into the next group of the 75%ers. So three out of their 4 clutch games, which is still very good. And certainly that's nothing to be disappointed about. There are 8 of those. We've got James Cook, Breece Hall, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, Zach Moss, Pollard, ETN, Josh Jacobs, and Austin Eckler. Now, a couple of those guys are injured and, missing some games. But are you concerned about especially Breece Hall? There's this, there's a lot of, what is going on? Why is Brian Allen being involved? Blah, blah, blah. But, Breece Hall's still 13th in total points. Now, I get it. You drafted him the first 8 picks. Somebody did, people did. He's still 3 for 4, and he's they're still trying. I think they're still trying to figure out that offense right now. They've had good games, they've had bad games. Now, granted, last week they played in some crappy weather, so you have to remember that too. And I think they played this coming week again in a somewhere that I think the
They're in
weather's supposed to
London.
be bad again. But I don't know if I have Brees Hall in any league, because usually if it came to him wherever I was drafting early, I was always like, I'm going to go Chase or I'm going to go Jefferson. And I did. And not saying it's right or wrong, just saying that's what I went. But for the Brees Hall owners out there, should they be concerned? Are you a Brees Hall owner? Do you have a few shares of them? And are you concerned about Braylon Allen in this offense?
I think you have to be. And I'm pulling some of this from fantasypoints.com, our guy Scott Barrett's everything report, because he had a great write-up on Brees Hall. And he talks about, Allen's share of the backfields growing every single week, right? Starting out week 1, 8.3% of the opportunities, all the way up to this past week, 37.5%. Okay. He only was outsnapped by Brees Hall by 2 snaps in the second half. Now, you draft a guy 2nd, 3rd, 4th overall. You don't want his backup splitting time with him. It's the same issue we're having with Bijan down in Atlanta. Is the backup is so talented that these coaches are fine with putting them both in there. And oh, by the way, you're starting to see Braylon Allen get the goal line work a little bit. And if he's getting some of that work, forget about it. I mean, now if Brees Hall's is between the 20s guy, and you're just hoping he catches a couple passes in a very slow New York Jets offense. I mean, and they're probably going to have Devontae Adams in a couple of weeks. So there's another mouth to feed. Good luck. I mean, I'm very nervous if I'm a Brees Hall owner.
Okay. Yeah. And again, I'm not, but there's certainly a lot of people out there like that. You brought up a good point. Bijan is perfect in consistency, but he's 20th in total points, which means he's just squeaking by. Now, the clutch factor for running backs and receivers are always very close. Running backs are 10.2, receivers are 10.5. So they're basically anything over 10.5. But Bijan is 20th in total points, which means he's skidding by, but he's sharing as well. Did Arthur Smith leave a clone or a ghost back in Atlanta? What is going on there with that? Is it just that offense is not as good as we thought? Kirk Cousins is not as good as we thought. Is he still struggling? What is happening in Atlanta from your numbers, your perspective? Is things just not gelling yet as a team? What is going on in Atlanta?
I think 2 things are going on here. Number 1, their offensive line is not great, and it's also pretty beat up right now.
Okay.
So, they got a couple of backups in there the past few weeks. And if you look at what Bijan did with his snap share the first couple of weeks, he had over 82% snap share, which was great. That was like top 3 in the league. Again, I'm pulling this from Barrett's report. And now, remember this, it popped up, Bob, where they're like, oh, he's got a little bit of a shoulder. People said maybe he's got a hamstring. That went all the way down to like 60% snap share. So, he got 11 touches and Algier got 10 last week. I think he's working through some kind of injury. Okay. And it also doesn't help. Like I said, the line isn't great right now, but I think that's going to turn around. So if you can buy low, or at least on a dip with Bijan, maybe this is the opportunity to do so.
Got it. No, definitely. Well, let's move on. I mean, again, there's quite a few running backs that are 50% or below, but I think we're all not surprised by most of them. Mixon has been hurt. Chase Brown didn't get the shares I think everybody thought he was going to, but then you saw that change a little bit. So I think that's all work in progress there. The rest of them are I think probably the biggest surprise is Devin Achin, but it's all ties to Tua.
Sure. Yeah, he's dead. The whole offense is dead until Tua comes back.
Yeah, right. And so unless they get, pull Ryan Tannehill in or whatever they need to do, find the second coming of, Peyton Manning somewhere, that I think we're just going to have to wait till week 8. Yeah, it's ugly. So speaking of ugly, let's talk about these wide receivers. So these are the things we always, we switched a couple of years ago. We're drafting 9 receivers instead of 9 running backs in the first round. We're loading up on receivers first 3 rounds, big shift over the last couple of years. No change, no different coming into this year. A lot of people did the same thing. Guess not gonna lie, I'm probably one of them too. But as I mentioned, only 4 wide receivers that are perfect, and only one of them was drafted in the first round. Only one more might have been drafted in the second round. And then you have Malik Neighbors and Chris Godwin too. So you have Justin Jefferson, Nico Collins, Chris Godwin, Malik Neighbors. Neighbors probably isn't a big surprise to a lot of people that just knew how good this kid was coming out of school. The real key was, can Daniel Jones get him the ball, which he seems to be doing okay. But if you throw to a guy, 10, 15 times a game, and he's that good, he's going to catch the ball. Interestingly enough. After that, we've got a 20 75%ers. So again, looking at that, so when we compare wide receivers to running backs, we had 20 total over that amount. Here we have 24. So good comparison of 75% or better. It's just a different shift. We have a lot of in the 75%, and I'm not going to read them all. But there's certainly a lot of surprises. People like, Alan Lazard, Rashid Shaheed, probably Khalil Shakir, Wayne Dell Robinson. Huh?
I just picked up Alan Lazard in a super deep league. I'm like, oh, God,
and what's funny is I picked him up. I actually drafted him late in King's Classic, because I'm like, well, they've got Garrett Wilson. Mike Williams is hurt. I mean, Aaron Rodgers seems to have that thing for people that played for him in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll pick him up just for the, more shits and giggles kind of. And yeah, now he's 3 for 4. He's 18th in total points. And, I paid probably $1 for him in the auction and, late round. But, don't put any genius status on me for that one. Jerry Jeudy there as well. In that group, like you said, the big studs are still up there in points. Amon-Ra St. Brown is 8th in total points and 75% consistent. But as you said, a lot of people, if you ask them how's Amon-Ra's doing for them, they'd be like, oh, he's terrible. He's killing me. Mm-hmm. Well, he's not. But compared to the numbers we're used to out of these studs, like Chase and Amon-Ra and, CeeDee Lamb, they're not setting the world on fire. So we're all of a sudden we're panicking because we all drafted these guys in the first couple rounds. Like you said, I think things are coming together as time goes on. Like you said, the offense will catch up and start outperforming the defense. But right now that is not the case. We've got 27 total wide receivers that are over 50% consistent. That's a little bit below the average of 36. But it just shows you how down the wide receivers are, but their clutch factor is still around 10.5. So I don't think we're far off on the wide receiver side. It's just that the stars aren't being stars at this point. They're being good and better than average, but not at the peak we were used to in the past when they were getting 20, 25, 30 points a week. And now they're averaging 15 to 20. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to like health for some of these guys and the quarterbacks tied to them, and maybe the health of some of those quarterbacks.
Sure, right.
But in terms of these receivers, if you get an Amon-Ra or a CeeDee Lamb or whatever, by the end of the year, even Jamar Chase, he didn't do anything first game or two of the season. They'll end up coming around. You got to also think corner play for stud corners, I would say, has never been better, in my opinion, in the NFL. You can look up and down the list and just go to George Pickens' schedule, by the way. Look at all the elite corners that some of these guys have to play against week in and week out. And then the propensity of some teams with zone and man. Certain offenses just operate those schemes better against man. Some are worse against zone. I know my guy John Hansen talks about this all the time on our Fantasy Points podcast. And there are some guys you could almost just get it down to a science of, it's, I'll make up a name here like Deontay Johnson. He's great against zone. He's playing against a team that's 80% zone this week. It's going to be a Deontay week. And then you have other guys who crush against man. So it really is almost like skill set and scheme specific for some of these guys is when they're going to go off. And that's how granular we can get with some of these stats. But yeah, when you dig a little farther down in here, Deontay Johnson, who I love this year, what's his issue? He didn't have a quarterback.
Right.
That's something going on with him. Garrett Wilson, he's not seeing the targets and he's not scoring. So that's kind of an issue.
Alan Lazard is.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's the sad part is, so last weekend I was watching, as I usually do, just Red Zone. And I think the Jets game was running a little bit later than others. So pretty much got to watch near the end of that game. And, they're trying to drive and every other pass play is going to Lazard, whether they complete it or not. And I'm like, as a Lazard owner, I'm like, this is fantastic. But if you're a Garrett Wilson owner, holy cow, do you have to be concerned? And like you said, now if Devontae comes in, what happens? Is he just going to throw to Lazard and Devontae and Garrett Wilson isn't going to get anything because he didn't play for him on the Packers team or what? I don't know.
I think it could help in a slight way to Garrett Wilson. It can't get worse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's already underperforming where you drafted him. But again, these defensive coordinators and players, they get paid too. So their whole point now is I'm going to game plan. How do I stop Garrett Wilson? Okay.
Right.
How do I stop Cooper Kupp? How do I stop, throw a guy in there, Rashee Rice or CeeDee Lamb. And these guys are all getting bracketed. They're getting this double coverage all day long. These defensive coordinators this year with those two high safety looks are now telling the quarterbacks, you can throw underneath, but we're going to take away this one option for you. Beat us with somebody else.
Right.
And that's what we're having to see. That's why Lazard is coming on. You're seeing him. And it's kind of some of these secondary options. You're like, man, where'd this guy come from? But,
well, you remember the old, right. You remember the old Bill Belichick scenario, right? Every game he went into, his goal was to stop the two best players, whatever they were. And now, so when you would play against New England, if one of your guys was one of those top two, you had to be concerned because they were going to basically take out whoever the top two guys were, whether it's running back, wide receiver, quarterback, whatever the case would be, and focus on shutting them down and saying, look, if you beat us with your wide receiver 2 or your tight end or whatever, that's fine. But you're not going to beat us with Tyreek Hill. You're not going to beat us with, CeeDee Lamb or whoever. And I feel like maybe teams are doing this, and with the two high safeties and like you said, the double coverage. And why wouldn't you? We're not defense coordinators, but I think we're all smart enough to go, look, if I'm playing, this week now, Brandon Cook's going to be out. If I'm playing the Cowboys, I'm double teaming CeeDee Lamb all day long and say, look, you can beat me with Jalen Tolbert and Jake Ferguson. Okay, cool. But I feel like I'm better off letting you try to do that than to let CeeDee Lamb run rampant because he will kill us. So,
and remember, Belichick's old move too was he would take his elite corner and put it on the secondary receiver, and then he would just double the first guy.
Oh,
so now it's like, oh crap! Now you really can't do anything out here. So
right.
I think by the end of the season, like we said, it'll come around a little bit, but it shows if you have a guy like a Neighbors, Nico Collins, Justin Jefferson, some of these guys who are pretty much matchup proof at this point. They're going to help you a lot more. And Chris Godwin going into the slot, that was a win. Anybody who recognized that and said, hey, I'm going to go attack Chris Godwin in my drafts and get him on my team. He's paying off dividends. He didn't score last week, but I think he still got you like 60, 70 yards.
Yeah, right. No, he's doing everything. He's that perfect, consistent model for anybody who wants to know more about it. He's that 6 for 60 guy. If he gets a touchdown, it's a bonus. But 6 for 60 is 12 points. That's a clutch game every week. And right now he's 5th in total points because he's had some bigger weeks. But it's those kind of people like Devontae Smith was 3 for. Wow, he missed a game. I was trying to find somebody else who's 4 for 4. There, let me see. So like you said, George Pickens, he's 3 for 4, but he's 29th in total points because he's just like you said, he's been playing against some of the best quarterbacks in the league every week, which certainly hasn't helped. And
he's number one in the league in air yards, but he never brings any of them in.
Right. But there's just a lot of that out there. And like you said, there's some of these guys that are going to turn it around. T. Higgins, Tyreek just needs a quarterback. Michael Pittman finally had a nice week when Joe Flacco took over. all of that's going to get turned around. I think the one that's probably the biggest surprise is the guy who's 61st in total points and 0 for 4 in consistency, and that's Brandon Ayuk. Now, are we shocked because he didn't have any preseason at all?
Right.
Because he was holding out the whole time? I guess not. But I would have thought by week 4, with with Debo already out of the picture, that Juwan Jennings sets the world on fire, not Brandon Ayuk. That's concerning.
I think what it is, and you hit the nail on the head, this is his training camp. He's working himself back into shape. He's got to get himself back acclimated, and he's missed some balls in the end zone. I remember a few weeks ago he had one bounce off his hands, and maybe touchdowns are more fluky. I mean, who would have thought Juwan Jennings was going to catch, what do you get, 3 touchdowns a week or so ago? Like, that's never going to happen again for him. So if I'm buying on a low end, player right now, Brandon Ayuk might be that guy I'm trying to buy on, because you always want to buy on talent, especially talent in really good schemes. And when you take a first-round pick in Brandon Ayuk, who has performed well enough to get a large contract, he didn't all of a sudden become a bum. He's just not in shape. So he's got to work himself into it. It's like the NBA. When you watch these guys early in the season and they do the load management, because they want to be ready for the stretch run. Same thing that the Chiefs were doing with Travis Kelce, but that plan got thrown out the window when Rashee Rice got hurt.
Yeah. No, that's a messy situation too. All right, let's move on to the I always say our favorite position to scratch our head over, and that is the tight end position. We have 0 perfects, 4 for 4. We have one that is George Kittle, was 3 for 3 and missed a game and still second in total points. But we do have some 75 percenters. Pat Freiermuth, Dalton Kincaid are the only 2 at 67%, 2 for 3. Jake Ferguson, Trey McBride, and Brenton Strange, who has been filling in for Mr. Evan Ingram, who I took in so many leagues, and it's been so heartbreaking. The rest is just everybody's 50. So there's only 6 tight ends who have played at least 3 games that is over 50% consistency. That means every other tight end, whatever number that you want to bring up, 30, 40, whatever, are 50% or less. And that is Dallas Goedert, Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, Kyle Pitts, Travis Kelce, go on and on, that are not doing the job. I started Freiermuth this week, basically because I had Ingram still sitting in IR. And I was like, well, it's either him or Isaiah Likely. And I'm like, he hasn't done anything. So I put Freiermuth in and he gets me 16 points. And I'm like, thank you, fancy God.
Huge. Oh, what a gift.
Yeah. Especially when he caught the touchdown. I was like, oh my gosh, he got a touchdown. Which again is not happening with the tight ends. There's no tight ends catching touchdown. That's why their points are so pathetic. Njoku's coming back. Evan Ingram's coming back. That's 2 guys that I have in quite a few leagues. So I'm hoping that
Hawkinson will be coming back.
Hawkinson will be coming back soon. Brock Bowers certainly will probably see more targets if Devontae goes away.
Well, what's killing him too is Michael Mayer's not there. He's been injured, and Michael Mayer will play in line and take all those blocking snaps. You wonder the last 2 weeks, like, hey, why is Brock Bowers stinking out there? It's because he's got to play like an actual tight end position as opposed to big slot he was doing before.
Right. At this point, everybody's tight end is bad. Usually you're looking at your team and you're like, man, my tight end sucks. But that's what everybody's saying right now, except maybe Kittle, a few owners, but probably not even Kittle. You're like, well, he missed a game already, and he's going to miss 3 or 4 because that's just the way he plays. Do we just not worry about the tight end position? Do we try to trade? I mean, yeah, I guess you could try to trade for Kelce or, one of these guys like Pitts and them and hope, Laporta, and hope they turn it around. But let's be honest, if you were the owner of one of those 3 guys, are you going to trade them away for a bag of rocks? Probably not, because you're in just as bad a shape as everybody else is. So I feel like tight ends, is there any words of wisdom that you've heard or you want to share with us that can make us kind of go, Okay, yeah. I mean, outside of just wait it out.
Well, look at the tight end position. We talked about touchdowns earlier, and
Mm-hmm.
there's only one tight end in the league who has more than one touchdown, and that's George Kittle. So it
Kittle.
just shows you that how
Yeah.
low the scoring is right now. And I'm just
Right.
scrolling through some of the names of Mark Andrews, Jake Ferguson,
Right.
Kelsey, Laporta, Ertz, Goddard, all these guys who don't have a touchdown yet on
Right.
the season. So if you're looking at tight end, what do I do for the rest of the year? Number one, try to find a guy that's playing a high snap share. Say, all right, well, who's on the damn field
Right.
when they're dropping back and throwing the football? That might be first and foremost. And then say, who doesn't have a lot of other options? And one name that keeps coming up over and over and over is my guy Turd Ferguson. Yeah, I lovingly call him that from that old SNL
Oh, I
skit
love
with
that. Yes.
Burt Reynolds. Yeah. But Jake Ferguson is a guy who is the number 2 option on the Dallas Cowboys. When Dak drops back to pass, it's Lamb. If not, boom, it's Ferguson. He's a guy I would be trying to get my hands on in
Mm-hmm.
every league right there.
Yeah.
Bowers, that's going to come back around. Kittle's fine. I like your Freiermuth call.
I was just going to say, you kind of basically described Pat Freiermuth. He's
Yeah.
the number 2 option on that team, especially now Justin Fields seems to have a little favor for him. Used him quite a bit in the last game, threw him a touchdown as well. Yeah, I think it fits your model very well. He's on the field all the time. He's a good blocker, and he catches, like you said, if he catches 5 balls for 50 yards, that's a clutch game because you only have to get over 7.2. So anybody scores a touchdown wins, obviously. But again, a 4 for 50, a 4 for 40, that's good enough in the tight end world at this point. If they get a touchdown, that's just like you just became the league winner for the week. But yeah, Freiermuth, obviously Dalton Kincaid is in that boat. Njoku's kind of in that boat now that hopefully he'll be back and can stay healthy. Evan Ingram
Kraft is a guy on some waiver wires.
Tucker Kraft, Tucker Kraft made a nice showing with Jordan Love back.
84% route share last week.
Yeah. So I agree. Those are the kind of guys that maybe you go out there and you start looking for. Nobody's going to be excited about Pat Freiermuth, and if you give them anything, throw in some M&Ms with the trade, you might just squeak him by. Throw him as an add-on. Like, hey, I'll trade you, this guy for that guy, and hey, I'll throw in, my, find another Cole Kmet, and you give me Freiermuth or something. I mean,
let me give you a couple of guys for the future here later in the season, because if you're making a trade for a tight end, chances are the person that you're talking to doesn't have another great option. So they're gonna be like, well, why do I want to give away Freiermuth? I don't have anything on my bench. Right. So if you can't make a trade and you want to look a little farther down the road, look at guys like Eric All in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. He's a rookie. Ben Sinnott, rookie with the Commanders. The guys in front of them are old in terms of Ertz and Gesicki, never can stay healthy. And these guys were really adept pass catchers coming out of college. So maybe a couple guys you can just keep an eye on. I don't necessarily think you got to, pick them up right now, but just watch out for those guys. And maybe they can kind of have like a end of the year Dalton Kincaid type, coming out party.
Yeah.
For your fantasy.
No, I agree. And I think anybody who's got some of those better tight ends like Turd Ferguson and some of those guys is you saw what happened when he went down and Schoonmaker came in. He earned a clutch game. So be honest with you, right now, the Cowboys tight end position would be a perfectly consistent because he filled in and still was getting the same targets, maybe not the same amount of targets, but definitely was still being looked at as a solid option, even though he was not Ferguson, the starter. He was still filling a role that he was a better receiver than Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert, which he probably was. But him and or whether it's them or Kincaid or if you have Evan Ingram after Brenton Strange goes back to the waiver wire, pick him up and put him on your bench if you can keep him there, because he certainly has filled in well and has been perfectly, or not perfectly consistent, but 2 out of 3 in Evan Ingram's absence. So like Brian said, look at the future. Look at what's going on. Look at your team see who you got. And if you don't have something, look to some of these guys that are out there.
Let me give you one more name.
Got
And
it. Love
God
it.
knows when he's going to come back, but he's been on PUP. Tyler Higbee from the LA Rams. Remember, he had the ACL late last year, kind of a low hit. I think he was against Seattle, maybe, or the Lions. It was the Lions, in the playoff game, right? If he can come back during this season, he's not on IR, he's on PUP.
Right.
So we'll just keep that tucked away in your back pocket.
I mean,
Maybe
because Colby Parkinson has had, he's 50%, 17th in total points. He's had a couple decent games. His best game was the first game when he had everybody on the field with Cup and and Puka and all of them there. He actually earned a clutch game then, just earned one again this past week. Again, that might even be somebody worth picking up if he's out there and available, because who else are they going to throw to until they get Cup and Nakua back? So it's definitely, we talked about this before, Brian, is, don't be that guy that just sets your lineup every week and doesn't worry about the waiver wire, or just looks at it once and kind of goes, that'll be worth it. Really work it. Really look at who's there, the games that are coming up, who's going to be on the bye. Pick up your guy for the bye 2 weeks ahead of time. That's certainly something I've always tried to do, is look ahead, especially like kickers and defenses. If you like to do that streaming thing, look 2 weeks ahead. Who's playing, whatever bad offense was Carolina, but you can't use that anymore. Right at this point, you might as well be the Browns. Who's playing Cleveland 2 weeks from now? Who's playing Miami right now, because they can't do anything. Look at those scenarios, but also look at that for the tight ends. Who are some bad? I mean, if you look at the, I'm sure Fantasy Points has this data, everybody pretty much does, but look at the, fantasy points given up by position, Kansas City, Baltimore, Indianapolis, Chargers, Minnesota, Carolina. They're all in the bottom part of giving up the most fantasy points to tight ends. Look at those games a couple weeks out and see if maybe, the Chargers or the Rams are playing them. Maybe Colby Parkinson would be a good pickup 2 weeks from now. Do that ahead of time, because if you wait to the week, then you either got to outbid for fab, or you've got, or you're not in the right order. So somebody's going to grab them now that they need them and they see that they have been successful. I picked up Priest Holmes, Kareem Hunt 2 weeks ago when I saw he was signed, even though I knew he was going to the practice squad. But it's in our Kings Classic. And as Brian knows, you have to be ahead of the game. You can't wait. Now he had a couple of decent games. Now I have him on my teams. So now I can play them. But I know that if I would have waited, I would not have gotten him for $3 coming into this week after the week he had last week. So again, in those deeper leagues or competitive leagues, you've got to be a step ahead to do that. So any last thoughts, Brian, before we take us out from here? But again, thank you for joining us. I really enjoyed it. But
yeah, the team that gives up the most fantasy points on average to tight ends this year, the Kansas City Chiefs. Who are they playing this week? The Saints. Maybe Juwan Johnson on your waiver wire. If you're desperate, maybe you're missing Dallas Goedert or Sam Laporta, or just everybody you have is dead. So take a shot there.
Yeah, Baltimore's second. And they're playing, who are they playing this week? Yeah, Buffalo at Cincinnati. So this might be an Eric all week.
Oh, Buffalo. Yeah, Buffalo's at Houston and Cincinnati, Baltimore. That's gonna be a fun one.
Cincinnati, Baltimore is second to last in giving up fantasy points to tight ends. So maybe this is a good week to, as Brian mentioned, Eric all could be sitting out there, probably is in most 12-team leagues. Pick him up. And if you've got nothing better to put in, if you're struggling because you have whoever, then get him in there, especially if you have like Laporta and who's on a bye. Not only has he not been playing well, but he's on a bye. And Dallas Goedert's on a bye. So again, maybe go out there and grab them. So Brian, thank you again for joining us, joining the show. Love talking with you, fantasy points, and you guys are I love you guys to death. Love listening to you every day. To everybody where they can find you and all your great stuff out on the social internet world.
Yeah, so on Twitter at Drake Fantasy. I do the streaming defense column over at fantasypoints.com. I do the Fantasy Points podcast twice a week with John Hansen. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio, the Fantasy Football Morning presented by Fantasy Points, the name of the show. I've got so many damn titles here, Bob. I can't even keep them all straight.
No, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, that's a mouthful when you guys say that every morning, because it used to just be like, guru in the morning, and that was very simple for everybody.
Very easy.
Now it's Fantasy Football Morning presented by Fantasy Points. So good stuff.
I know, and I talk too fast because I'm thinking something, I'm saying something, and I'm probably reading something else at the same time.
Yep. I've always
thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you again. So, of course, you can all follow me at Bob_Lung. Check out Big Guy Fantasy Sports for all the great stuff. All the consistency tools are there. If you haven't gotten deep into this yet, you haven't looked at who's the most consistent players on your team, you have no idea, and all this stuff is new to you, check out the site, bigguyfantasysports.com. I think you'll love it. You'll really enjoy adding something new to help you make some decisions. And this stuff really will help you go, oh, this is why my team's not doing well. I have all of these inconsistent players, even though they might be top whatever in total points. That's the kind of stuff that we're here to help people see and give you that information so that you can use that as you're trying to, go on that week-to-week basis to win. Again, you have to win week after week. You can't just score the most points one week and live on the laurels for the next 3. It doesn't work that way. Every week you got to be out there. You got to be scoring points and scoring more than the other team, and consistency will certainly help you do that. So once again, for Brian Drake, I'm Bob Lung. Everybody take care. God bless, and we will see you soon.